Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and today we are getting into something that, honestly, completely changed how I look at my own stress levels.
And I am the resident expert here. And I have to say, this source material is just, well, it is incredibly counterintuitive, but so powerful.
It really is. I mean, think about every app on your phone or, every morning routine and self-help book out there. They all share this one fatal, exhausting assumption.
Right, the expectation of addition.
Exactly. We are constantly sold this idea that to find peace, you have to do more. Like, if you want to be calmer, you need to add a 20-minute breathwork routine.
Or buy a gratitude journal and write in it every single day.
Yeah, you need the cold plunge, the habit tracker, the optimized 10-step wind down sequence. We treat peace of mind like it is a literal construction project.
Like you have to haul in raw materials and build a fortress of Zen from the ground up, which is precisely why so many people are walking around chronically fatigued.
Because it is just too much.
It is. This whole optimization culture operates on a fundamental misunderstanding of how the human nervous system actually finds rest. It assumes your default state is broken.
Right, and that you have to acquire all these new tools to fix it. Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive.
Yes, because the text we are looking at completely flips this paradigm on its head.
It really does. It draws from some of the oldest contemplative lineages in the world, all right? We are talking about Vedanta, which is ancient Indian non-dualism, Taoism, Theravada Buddhism, and even the early Christian hermits, the Desert Fathers.
And despite all their historical differences, they all agree on one radical premise. The secret to becoming quieter or genuinely peaceful is not an achievement.
It is entirely about subtraction.
Exactly. The core argument is that the peace you were looking for, that elusive still point, you cannot acquire it because it is already structurally present inside you.
Wow. So it is already there.
It is already there. You experience it in exact proportion to how much you stop interfering with it.
So the question changes completely. It is not, how do I build more peace? It becomes, what am I actively generating right now that is displacing the peace that is already there?
Precisely. And that is what we are going to unpack today.
Yeah, we are going to define what a true low baseline actually looks like. Then we will identify the 5 specific distortions that are actively jacking up your nervous system.
And finally, how to unlock a completely different level of personal power by doing absolutely nothing but letting go.
Which sounds amazing, but to start, I think we need to get very clear on what a quiet baseline actually is.
Good point, because the cultural stereotype is highly misleading.
Yeah, when people hear about deep inner peace, they picture someone who is just numb. You know, the guru on the mountain who never gets angry, never feels sorrow, and just floats through life.
Right, they do not even blink when it rains. But the source material is explicitly clear that this numbed-out, effectless stillness is not peace at all.
I found this part fascinating. The text says that kind of numbness is actually a trauma response. It uses a striking phrase. It is a bunker, not a ground.
I love that phrase. Think about the architecture of a bunker. It is heavily fortified, it is buried deep, and it is designed primarily to keep the outside world away.
Sure, you might be safe inside, but you are also trapped.
Exactly. And more importantly, maintaining those thick walls requires a tremendous continuous expenditure of energy. Active suppression is exhausting.
But a ground is totally different.
Yeah, a ground is just solid beneath your feet. It is open to the weather, open to the changing seasons, but it supports you effortlessly. What these traditions are pointing toward is a state called equipoise.
Okay, let me test that concept, because equipoise sounds like a beautiful, poetic ideal. But is that an actual achievable state for us in the real world?
It absolutely is, and it is entirely physiological. Equipoise basically means the autonomic nervous system has fully integrated its experiences.
So there is no residual charge running in the background.
Right. There are no subterranean narratives generating low-grade cortisol drips all day. When a stressor passes, your parasympathetic nervous system engages immediately, and you return to a clean, present state.
That makes me think of like a high-performance shock absorber on a car.
Oh, that is a great analogy. Unpack that a bit.
Well, the person living with a low baseline is not driving on a magically flat road. They still hit potholes, right? They get bad news, they experience grief, they get frustrated with their boss.
Of course they are human.
But they do not have this stiff suspension that rattles the whole chassis when they hit a bump. That would be the bunker approach.
Yes, exactly.
Instead, they actually take the bump fully. They compress. But their return to center is incredibly fast. The disturbance does not accumulate.
That interval between the disturbance and the return, That is the true metric of peace. They let the wave of emotion arrive completely, feel the physical sensation, and then simply do not hold on to it.
And as that interval gets shorter, to an outside observer, it just looks like radical stillness.
Which naturally brings us to the big question for anyone listening. If the ideal state is this rapid return to center, what is generating that residual charge?
Right. Why do we stay stressed for weeks after a single event?
This is where we enter the core framework of the text, the 5 distortions. Imagine your baseline state of mind as a pond.
Okay, a pond.
And true peace is the natural glass-like resting state of that pond surface. We have to examine what structurally disturbs it. We're talking about the heavy infrastructure we have built beneath the surface.
The infrastructure of avoidance. I like that. So let's look at the first piece of that infrastructure. Distortion number 1, blockage.
A blockage is essentially unprocessed experience. It is an emotion that was felt but never fully metabolized by the body.
Like a piece of grief you survived but never integrated.
Or an insight about a relationship that you just completely refuse to accept. The defining characteristic of a blockage is that it is heavy, and it demands an enormous energy budget to maintain.
The text uses another fascinating metaphor here. It explains that the psyche has to route its processing around these blockages the exact same way a river routes around a dam.
Yeah, and dams do not just exist naturally.
No, they require constant structural reinforcement against the immense pressure of the water. So how does that translate to our daily energy levels? How does a blockage burn calories?
It burns energy through cognitive and somatic vigilance. If you have an unprocessed trauma, your brain has to constantly scan your environment to ensure you do not accidentally trigger that feeling.
So you are running this complex, invisible algorithm at all times.
Exactly, just to avoid touching the blocked material. And because you have been doing it for years, it becomes invisible to you. You just assume that life is inherently exhausting.
That is a massive realization. Chronic exhaustion often has nothing to do with your daily schedule being too demanding.
Right. It is the cost of funding this invisible internal infrastructure.
You are burning your own capacity just to keep from feeling something that is already inside you.
And when you finally stop funding the dam and allow yourself to confront the blockage, it is acutely uncomfortable. You literally have to experience the exact somatic sensation you spent years avoiding.
But the text notes the energy returned to you after that is staggering.
It is like shutting down a massive hidden generator. Suddenly, all that wattage is available for your actual life.
Wow. Okay, so if blockages are the static dams we build to hold back the past, distortion number 2 is much more active. It is how we handle the present. Distraction.
Yes, distraction is the active cultivation of interference. It is reaching for your phone the millisecond you step into an elevator.
Or scheduling yourself with back-to-back meetings so there is literally no empty space.
And the text makes a very sharp distinction here. Distraction is not a moral failure, and it is not a lack of discipline. It is a highly coherent strategy.
A strategy for avoiding authentic presence. The argument is that the distracted person does not have a focus problem, they have a presence problem.
Exactly. Being truly present means making direct contact with what is actually occurring in your body right now.
And if making contact with yourself is painful, you install a continuous interruption mechanism. You create noise to avoid the signal.
Precisely.
But wait, I have to challenge this. I think a lot of listeners will feel the same way I do.
Go for it.
When it has been just a brutal Tuesday and I finally sit on the couch and scroll through social media for 45 minutes, that genuinely feels relaxing to my brain. How is that avoiding presence?
I mean, it feels like a relief in the microsecond because it provides a cheap dopamine hit. But structurally, distraction generates far more discomfort than it prevents.
How so? It feels like it is turning the stress off.
Let's look at the mechanism. The underlying anxiety or the frustration from your workday, that feeling does not dissolve just because you divert your attention. It ferments.
Oh, it ferments and builds pressure.
Yes, the internal pressure rises because the physical stress cycle has not been completed. So the signal gets stronger beneath the surface.
Which means I need even more distraction to manage it.
Exactly. You start needing a podcast playing while you scroll or 2 screens going at once. It is a closed loop that feeds on itself.
So I am not resting. I am just turning up the volume on the television so I cannot hear the smoke alarm blaring in the kitchen.
That is a brutal but perfect way to put it.
Okay, so blockages and distractions are behavioral, but the texts then shift to the cognitive layer, how our intellect sabotages us, which brings us to distortion number 3, misinformation.
Right. And in this context, misinformation is not about fake news. It refers to your internal library of false beliefs.
The foundational axioms you hold about reality and who you are. Things like, if I do not constantly prove my worth, I will be abandoned.
Or, the world is inherently hostile to people like me. These present themselves to our minds as unquestionable facts of gravity.
And the psychological cost of holding these false axioms is what the text calls confirmatory labor.
Yes, because these beliefs are fundamentally untrue, the actual world does not naturally align with them. So your psyche has to work overtime to force incoming data to fit the lie.
Give me a concrete example of confirmatory labor in action.
Okay, imagine someone who holds the internal misinformation that they are fundamentally a burden to others. They get a text from a friend that said, "Hey, can't make it tonight, let's catch up next week."
A person without the distortion just sees a scheduling conflict.
Exactly. But the person with the misinformation instantly analyzes the tone, reviews their past 3 interactions, and distorts the neutral message to prove their friend is abandoning them.
They actively misinterpret reality to prove their deepest fear is true. That sounds utterly exhausting.
It is. Your psyche is never at rest. But when you genuinely see through a piece of misinformation, the relief is intensely physical. A massive, invisible machine simply powers down.
Which sets us up perfectly for distortion number 4, misinterpretation. If misinformation is the corrupted database, misinterpretation is the real-time processing glitch.
Yes, it is how we constantly conflate a pattern with a prediction.
This reminds me of a smartphone's predictive text going completely haywire.
Oh, that is a great way to look at it.
Like, you mistype a word once, and for the next 3 years, every time you type a normal sentence, your phone aggressively autocorrects to that weird mistake.
Right, just because you typed it once doesn't mean it belongs in every message.
But our brains do this with reality. We assume the current situation will play out exactly like a past trauma. But wait, isn't pattern recognition necessary for survival?
Well, survival mechanics are not the same as flourishing mechanics. Yes, for a physical threat, the prediction keeps you alive. But emotional realities are highly complex and rarely identical.
So when you apply predictive text to human interactions, the cost is immense.
Right, because your amygdala hijacks your nervous system, generating preemptive grief and a flood of cortisol before the situation even unfolds.
And your body does not know you're just reacting to a memory. It thinks the tiger is in the room right now.
Exactly. Every misinterpretation is a real biological activation. You expend real energy maintaining hypervigilance for a threat that only exists in your mental archives.
So how do we fix that?
By widening the gap between stimulus and response, slowing down the instant of interpretation, allowing reality to show you what it actually is.
Okay, so we have covered blockages, distractions, misinformation, and misinterpretation. These 4 alone explain the modern epidemic of burnout.
But the contemplative traditions point to one final foundational layer that drives all of them. Distortion number 5, unrealistic context or the root illusion.
This is the deepest water we are swimming in. This concept is found at the heart of Subtraction, the ancient Tibetan tradition, and Advaita Vedanta.
Right. The root illusion is this deeply held, unexamined belief that you are a separate, bounded, isolated self living inside your head.
And that your survival depends entirely on managing an external world that is fundamentally indifferent to you. The feeling of me in here desperately fighting against the universe out there.
Yes, and the text points out a brilliant, darkly humorous reality. If you accept that false frame, then having a highly stressed baseline is not a dysfunction at all.
It is a perfectly logical solution.
Exactly. If the world is a literal war zone, hyper-alertness is the only rational response. The restless, scanning mind is just doing its job perfectly based on the data it was given.
The only problem is that the foundational premise is incorrect.
And these traditions are not asking you to adopt a new religious belief. They are pointing to a direct, empirical recognition you can verify in your own experience.
Which is that the boundary of separation simply is not occurring. The rigid wall between you and the environment is a cognitive construction.
And when you truly recognize that construction as a construction, the entire pond metaphor breaks down. It shatters completely.
Because you realize you were never the disturbed surface of the water frantically trying to calm yourself down.
You were the pond itself all along. You are the open space of awareness in which all these events are passing through, and that deep fullness was never actually disturbed.
This introduces one of the most powerful concepts in the text, outpowering by subtracting. I find this fascinating because our culture talks about power almost exclusively in additive terms.
More leverage, more wealth, more force.
Yeah, but the contemplative literature talks about a different order of power, Potency.
Potency is not generated by grinding harder. It is simply what is naturally revealed when you remove the interference.
Think about it in terms of available wattage. If you are actively maintaining distraction habits, defending a library of misinformation, and operating under the root illusion of a separate, threatened self.
You are consuming almost all of your own mental capacity just to keep those defense systems running.
You are living your life on maybe 10% of your actual wattage, because the other 90% is tied up in background maintenance.
It is an incomprehensible energy drain. When a person clears this interference, they aren't magically doing more things, they are doing significantly less.
But their perception becomes crystal clear.
Right. Their responses become accurate to the moment. Beneath all the noise, the capacity was always there.
So, as the listener, I am completely sold. I want my wattage back. But here is the practical trap. How do we do this without turning subtraction into just another exhausting item on our self-improvement to-do list?
The text refers to the practical geometry of this process. It relies on one primary mechanism: honest attention.
How does honest attention actually work biologically? What distinguishes it from just overthinking your own problems?
Well, overthinking is often just another sneaky layer of distraction. Honest attention is decoupling the physical sensation from the cognitive story.
Oh, interesting.
It is the brave willingness to simply feel a constriction in your chest or a heat in your face without immediately trying to label it, solve it, or blame someone for it.
You just observe the somatic data.
Exactly. When you observe a sensation without narrative interference, the nervous system is finally allowed to process the data. The biological stress cycle closes.
Clarity is simply what remains when the resistance naturally subsides.
And the goal is not to become an ascetic monk living in a cave devoid of personality. Individuals who clear these distortions are actually characterized by unusual vitality and incredible humor.
When you stop wearing the heavy armor of these distortions, the colors of life are brighter. You just finally have a stable relationship with the depth.
The instruction is profoundly simple. Stop adding interference and notice what remains.
Because it has been waiting for you all along. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to explore on your own.
Oh, I love these.
We have talked extensively about applying this concept of subtraction to your internal mind. But consider what happens when you apply outpowering by subtracting to the external structures of your life.
Like our workspaces or relationship.
Exactly. Think about the bloated, meeting-heavy culture of modern corporate management. We are constantly trying to add new policies or new software to fix dysfunction.
Always adding.
What if the ultimate unlock for your career or your marriage or your community isn't finding the perfect new thing to add?
What if it requires zero extra effort?
Right. What if the most rebellious, powerful thing you can do tomorrow is simply stop managing the noise and dare to trust the quiet that is already there?